Okay, so excuse me. The game I'm looking at right now is Warrior Knights. This is, and also to a lesser extent, the Crown and Glory expansion to it. I'm only going to be playing with one of the expansions. This is the Fantasy Flight version as opposed to the old Games Workshop version. I've played the old Games Workshop version a couple of times. I don't remember it well. I don't remember this well either. I've never played it. But I've looked over the rules, and my initial intention had been play it with Crown and Glory. Crown and Glory has three different expansions involved in it. I looked at them and said the big one, which involves lots of new cards and a bunch of new rules, a scribe, knowledge, all this kind of sort of a technology type setup. Replacement of some of the actions, if that's this. No, this is the event deck. Or fate, I can't remember which is which. One's events, one's fate. And one of them gets replaced entirely. New cards, new actions come in. All sounds exciting and everything, but I'm not absolutely convinced that that's going to make it a better game, so I'm going to play the original with one expansion. And that expansion is the King. Looking over the base rules, and I'll go over them in a moment, it seems clear to me that the game, without the full victory option, which is I believe how the old Games Workshop game worked, where you had to basically knock everybody else out of the game. I think you had to own every city, and I think that's what the rules are here if you play with that. There's another option which is, or the base game, which is having the most influence points when all the influence runs out. You play the game, you get these special influence points, and whoever's collected the most over the game, and they're essentially victory points, wins. There's a pool of them, but that pool is extended. Basically, the pool just says, once these are all gone, that's the last turn of the game. There's some more over here. A couple of things I want to say right off the bat. The components. Now, I'm usually not a big fan of plastic pieces, but it's done with moderation here, and they're fantastic. There's weight to them. The cities really have some heft. They're just nice, dense plastic. The counters are really, really good quality. So, I'll harsh on something like Twilight Imperium, which Fantasy Flight put out, because of their choice of counters. In this case, so far, it looks like there's a really, really wonderful design behind these high-quality pieces, as opposed to just, hey, let's make lots of plastic minis, Here, not only is the quality very good, but also you only have 4 of these minis on the board. They indicate your armies, and they're really significant pieces. Actually, I would suggest one more piece would be a good idea, which is the Stronghold. This ends up being on the board. You set it up. I haven't gotten to setup yet. I think just a counter for that kind of reduces the importance of the piece in the game. I think a nice bigger city type version, and hell, if you want to go all out with the money, I wouldn't mind if they made little wall things that you actually put around the cities to indicate that as well. Not necessary though, and we'll see that. Okay, so I'm going to go over a little bit about setup. Everybody's randomly Delta leader. They get a set of what do we get? A set of military leaders. They get a baron, and they get some troop counters, all the same. They get some action cards, all the same, and they also get a couple of semi-random mercenary cards, which are drawn from the mercenary deck over there. Semi-random because everybody gets the same force points, but their nationalities, which has some effect on play, are somewhat randomized. I actually haven't set everything up. There's going to be some mercenaries down here, and after everything's set up, and some action cards out, but after everything's set up, starting with, and this is also determined at random, the chairman, who will be running, well, that's a title that goes to the person who's going to be running the, essentially the parliament. Starting with him, you pick where your stronghold goes, and then in reverse order, you start picking where your actual nobles are placed. You first set up the troops for those nobles in the stronghold, though, and basically you can put them on the board. The board includes some interesting areas that we haven't gotten, these are from the original game too. Not only does it have this sort of fantasy land here, it doesn't represent anything real in Europe, but we have some overseas territories that you can go to that are more valuable, but they don't count towards the kingdom itself, whatever mythical kingdom this is. Now, these are real European places, or in the case of, let's say, Jerusalem, and Acre, and Alexandria, extra-European, but historical, areas, as are where you send your voyages of exploration or discovery or whatever they are. Basically, you can send out trade fleets into China, the Spice Islands, or Ceylon, and that's got a nice little mechanism in it. And I don't know how much those have changed, but the basic feel and flavor and board, the nobles, etc., is all from the original Warrior Knights, including we've got this kind of fantasy land that supposedly is somewhere in Europe, but it doesn't really match anything. Okay, I'm going to finish up with the setup. Then I'll come back and try to describe the rules, largely because I need a reminder of them. I've read through them once, maybe twice, once with a very light skim beforehand. So that'll help remind me, and it'll perhaps familiarize you with the rules and the components, etc. Okay, so here I am, not yet playing Warrior Knights still. Tremendous reluctance here. Tremendous. Some of it may have to do with the overwide rule book, which is difficult to assess, many colors, shiny paper, whatever. I'm not really sure why. I mean, I read the rules, but maybe having gotten burned once with the Twilight Imperium, it's hard. Maybe also my life circumstances are making it more difficult for me to focus on any game. I'm just not sure. But I'm certainly having a really hard time getting this started. Let's start with the rules. Again, I haven't prepared them terribly well, but with a rule book like this, that's hard for me to do. It's always hard, and it's particularly hard with this. Okay, well, I finished the setup, and the first thing that happened was the placement of the strongholds. Well, also we have these agenda cards that are out, and one of the first ones I notice is we're going to vote on shuffling the Fate deck, which hasn't happened. Some may come out, but that's an odd sort of thing to vote on, actually. Okay, so let's see what we have here. Players have set up trying to keep their stronghold out of the way of other players. That's important because if you lose your stronghold, and I think I'm not playing with the sudden death rules, if you lose your stronghold, you lose half your cash. And that makes it harder. It's definitely a goal for other players if you're hoarding cash. There may be other effects as well. One variant on the game is if you lose your stronghold, you're out of the game. And that seems very, very difficult because, to tell you the truth, the players have enough strength to take each other's strongholds right at the beginning of the game. And with 6 players, I think it would be very hard to dominate the countryside with your armies to prevent someone from taking your strongholds. So Black played the initial one down here thinking, it's in the corner near me, there's some cities near there, that's all good. And Purple jumped as far away as he could. And Green as far away as he could, and Blue is saying, I think I'm going to go to the center. There's this ring of cities, and I'm going to just try to dominate that. Red moved over to his corner, and now Yellow's in the there's nowhere far from people I could go. They ended up playing down here, not far from Black's stronghold, and I think they're going to be in a fight right from the beginning. The board really only holds sort of 5 separate areas that I see, at least with the amount of space that the players that I saw were putting out, which means the last player and someone else are going to be kind of doomed to being close to each other in a 6-player game. Now, obviously, a different kind of spacing could have been chosen, but there's something almost natural about the placements in the corners and in the center. It's very difficult to see where a 6-player setup would naturally occur. I'm not sure there. Okay. And then, going in reverse order, each player plays their knights or nobles or whatever. And some of them had to already pick how they had their strength allocated. Everybody put their strength on their nobles themselves instead of with their baron or whatever, who actually ends up defending the stronghold. 2 different options here. Basically, put all your forces together and go for the long siege operations, or split your forces up and go for the long siege operations in 2 separate cities, or put all your forces together and go for an assault on one city. The choices of which nobles, all the players have nobles who have the same values, but different people made different choices as to which of the nobles to take. One of the ones that I think is most valuable at the beginning from my initial is does not pay wages for troops if army size is under 450. Now you don't count the plus 200 there, I think. So 2, 3, 400, hey, all your troops fit under that at the beginning of the game. And certainly reducing the amount of wages you're paying seems like a good thing. But all the others have military, direct advantages in combat. So for example, it inflicts an extra 100 casualties, prevents 100 casualties, and then the one more is adds a victory. A victory means if you don't wipe the other guy out, if you have more victories, you win the battle. We'll get to that in a moment, or in time. Okay. So, each game round is going to be broken up into 3 basic phases: planning, actions, and upkeep. Now, during planning, you pick from your hand of cards, and you have these action cards, which are different things that you can do. 6 of them in this variant. I think you may pick more in the big expansion for Crown and Glory that you want done. Now these are things that not just you get to do, but everybody gets to do. They form the basis of the next turn. And we'll go over the different abilities on these, but once we hit the action phase. So these cards are then played 2 per slot here. There's 3 different slots to indicate sort of 3 different periods in the game, in the upcoming turn. The first always comes before the second, always comes before the third. So you're putting 2 actions down and saying, I want these 2 to definitely happen before these 2. And everybody else is doing this. And the chairman, and this doesn't really matter, picks, I think they're from here. Whoa. Oh shit. I grabbed the wrong thing. Okay, let's pull the agenda. That makes a lot more sense to have it in there. So we've got 3 agendas here, and I'll explain them when we hit to them, but like bail out the treasury at the start of each assembly, attending barons may pay 10 grounds to score 1 influence. Sort of like a Republic of Rome type, give money to the state. These are things that we're going to vote on. That one's, I believe, a yes-no, and that's indicated down here. We have another one that goes to a specific baron, and then a private motion that's going to be controlled by the green player. Private motions are limited now in the base game, although there are options to expand it. In the original game, it was basically, hey, you make it up, man. Which I thought was kind of cool, but, there were things like the blue players eliminated. What? Hey! Okay. So, well, since we've exposed some of these, and I'll shuffle them back in, but 2 of these are put at random into each of these slots. So there's going to be, 8 different actions in each slot. Now that's a lot that's going to happen in any given turn. And some of so the players have the same phase cards to choose from, but the neutrals have a different set of cards that have different effects, like reshuffle the fate deck, for example. I didn't see that before. Okay. And then, what do we have here? Well, as you use your cards, and as they get played from here, they end up in these special spaces, which can trigger special phases of the game, or special little rounds, or whatever you want to call them. Instead of just an action that comes from a card, sometimes one of these gets triggered, either the taxation, the assembly, or the wages. And that could actually happen depending on how people play. I think the map's damaged. Map feels not as wonderful as I hoped. It's got a graininess, but not. So you may start your turn with less cards than you do in the first turn. In the first turn, you have all your different actions. Okay, so now when we hit the actual actions, what happens is these have been shuffled. So nobody knows what's what. And if you notice, the backs are all the same. So you don't even know whose you have. The only thing to distinguish is the front as to who gets it back in the end. Okay, and then when an action gets drawn, it's immediately resolved. And the details come up shortly. But after the action card is resolved, it then gets dumped into one of these 3 spaces. And when enough cards show up in these, or in any given one of those, that immediately triggers the special action that takes place when that happens. And that is when we get over twice the number of players. Over? No, equal to. So once there's 12 cards in any one of those, we'll get a special action. And then this continues until one of these is gone. And then we move to the next one. And then we move to the next one. And after we go through all of them, we'll go to the upkeep phase where you have to pay your troops and stuff. Okay, and in upkeep, the first thing you do is you check for victory. And like I said, there's 2 victory conditions. I lied about the first one. It's owning half the unraised cities in the game. So cities start off as happy and fine. Now, in less players, there's less cities. Some of them are raised already. But you have the option to destroy them. And if you do that, they stop being cities. Now, in general, since they're a good thing to own, and they count directly towards your victory, you don't want to raise cities after you capture them. But if they're not really tenable, you may want to just destroy them at that point. And you get some extra cash from doing that. But overall, I think you want to hold the cities because you're putting other people in a better position by raising the cities towards victory, at least. Okay. And the other thing that you get during the upkeep phase is you get an influence for each city you control. And if the influence runs out, go to the spares here, but then the game would normally end. Now we're playing a little differently. We're going to play with the crown variant, where once these run out, let's see how this works. Once those run out, and there's less, I'm only playing with 8 instead of 10 in there, because it's going to be a longer game with the variant anyway. The player who has the most influence gets the king token, and there's kind of a crown under here. And then that person, well, from then on, the game continues until somebody has 16 influence total. Now, the king has some advantages once he appears. One of which is each turn he gets an extra influence. more than he normally would for being the king. And the other is he gets a pile of King's Armies cards that he can use. But that's all he has. You don't have to be king to win the game. Someone else can end up with that much influence. There's another variant I'm not playing with because I think it'll just make things a little more complex than I want to handle at this point. The big variant I definitely don't want to do, not so much because of complexity, but because I want to experience the base game before I go to something that modifies it that much. The other one is the missions variant, and in that each Baron gets a random card that gives him bonus influence if he achieves some goal. And he can only reveal it sort of on the winning phase, which in the base game would mean, well, if you weren't playing with the crown part, because it can't be part of the base game, but it would mean once the pool runs out, and in the crown variant, it means if it would put you to 16, or if someone else is at 16, you can reveal those, basically. It's just sort of a final boost to your points. Okay. Anyway, let's go back to where we were, which is the upkeep phase. In that, there's a few other things. There are possibilities that cities revolt if you don't have a noble in the area. If you have a city without a noble, you have to draw a fate card, and if the fate card says revolt on it, the city becomes neutral, and you lose it. You have an option to pay the city off in one of a couple of ways. You can pay them, twice their income in crowns to keep them. Okay, that's kind of expensive. Or you can pray that they stay with you. You pay one faith counter and they stay with you. Those faith counters are a new addition to the game. Those were not in the original version, and nor was the leader of the church. Okay. Sea movement rivals, if you're traveling by sea movement, and I know nothing about this to tell you the truth, then you arrive at this point. It takes a long time to get across the sea. Your nobles, when you use them, flip over to their exhausted side, and you get to refresh them during the upkeep phase. Now this is kind of interesting, because it means there's a lot going on that's not army movement with all these cards. And we'll see just how much of that a lot going on there really is. Okay. And then, let's see, return nobles to the board. If you want, you can move troops between nobles and bring them onto the board. Okay, what about your action cards? You have a number of these. I'm going to load this up and start a new one because this is going to be a long explanation, I can see. Okay, we're about to start looking at the action cards. And the Baron has certain choices. So for example, he has the levy taxes choice. And when this comes up, each player, the player of the card, really? Action cards are per player. I was mistaken about that. Okay. So the player who put this into the action pile gets a crown for each area that has one of his nobles. He doesn't get anything for the cities or such. This is just, he's levying taxes on the peasantry here. He's taking an active role to do this. This will not exhaust the nobles, and if nobles are on a port, actually on a counter where they're traveling to, they're considered at sea, so they don't get to levy taxes. Okay. So there's a lot less action than I thought in these. Draft soldiers. You're able to put one of your counters on the mercenary track for free. And I'll explain how the mercenary track works later. But essentially, by placing here, you're making a commitment, not for that, to take one of the mercenaries up there. Not a commitment, but you're making an opportunity for yourself to do so. And what is the limit there? Okay, the limit is you can place it on a space that's not higher than the number of players. And you see a gold marker there. It looks like it's to your advantage to place as far to the right as you like, I think. But we'll see, because I think these guys get first pick, which might be worth more too. Okay. Rally support is the next one. That grabs you a couple of vote counters, which I think are these and these. And those are used in assembly. And if, after doing this, you have more votes than any other Baron, you get this. For whatever that's worth. Okay. Alright, the next one. Did we miss one? We've got to mobilize forces. We can do that one. Okay, mobilize forces. If you pick this, you can move one or more of your unexhausted nobles into an area, start a battle, or do both. Okay. Movement, well, I haven't really covered that, but it's basically one space, unless you're on a road where it can be 3 spaces. Now, each of these cards lists on top. So this one goes into the taxation special event. This one goes into the wages special event. And this one goes into the assembly special event. Mobilize forces either goes into wages or assembly. If you just move, it goes into wages. If you just fight, it goes into assembly. If you do both, you get to pick which of those it goes into. And then the final is this versatile action or strategy, where you get one of these: gain 2 crowns, gain a vote, move one of your nobles, or start a battle, or pay to place your Baron marker on the mercenary track. Now you have to pay, and in this case you pay the listed fee. Oh, well, there we go. So in this case you pay the cost listed on here to go on the mercenary track, as opposed to with the other card where you get to go there for free. So I would say, unless you're needing to raise maximal troops or don't have the draft soldiers card, you don't want to use this. And this one gets to go, I believe, back in your hand. How about that? So that does not trigger any events when you use it. And you should only have one of those then, no? No, because you may want to do it more than once, so you might have more than one. But it looks like indeed you only have one of those. Well, there's another action here. I see a serve the church, which I missed here. So when you play this, you gain a faith, and if you have more faith than any, and those are these little markers, if you have more faith than any other player, you get this, whatever that means. And that one you get to put in any of the 3 places. Okay, there are some neutral action cards too. So what are those? There's important events. And when that comes up, and I think we actually had one of them, maybe that's explained better there. The head of the church chooses a baron to resolve the top event. Now the events are colored. Red means bad, green means good, and blue means something else. Okay. If it's a red event, then the head of the church can draw it himself, or he can pay a faith to choose an opponent to draw it. And it'll be something bad for the baron who draws it. If it's a green event, he can pay a faith to draw it himself, or pick someone else to draw it. And I believe the blue ones, it doesn't matter who draws them. And these have different effects on the person who draws them. Okay, there's also, and we have one of these here too, fund expeditions. The chairman of the assembly can start an empty expedition, and this is an attempt where players can put an amount of money on that to try to gain a multiple of that amount if it makes it through. It gets slowly, as it travels its way, it may end up sinking or something. Or it may end up making it there and then getting a payoff. The head of the church is allowed to bless the expedition by paying a faith, and that'll give it a bonus when it makes it. And every time that a Fund Expeditions card comes up, you resolve movement on the spot, on the track. And let's see. If the expedition is on the 1 or 2 spots, it's advanced 1 spot on the space, on the track. If it's on the 3 spot, even if it just made it there, you draw a fate card, and it can either stay there, get lost, or make a payoff. Okay. There's there's a few extra remaining ones up that I didn't have here. Upgrade defenses. You can repair a city with that for 2 crowns per breach token. And you can only do this to 1 place. Or you can fortify a city for 4 crowns, and then instead of cities will normally be marked like this as one player's or another's, you can improve its wealth, production, and its defenses. So here you'll see it's got 100 extra men for defense, and it's got +1 income generation by fortifying the city. But that costs $4 to do. You can only do 1 of those. There's a muster troops card, which each person's allowed to remove casualty markers from their soldiers. And I got them somewhere. I don't know. That's these. Gravestones. That's why they're gravestones. Okay. And they cost $2 each to repair from your troops. And I think you can do as many as you like. No, from 1 army. Any number of troops in the army, but 1 army only. And then there's the Uncertain Times card, which is here, which reshuffles the Fate deck. Now the Fate deck takes the place of the dice in this game. Yeah, I have a die here, but for the most part, that's how all random events are generated here. I don't remember that being the case in the original. There may have been a Fate deck, but I don't think it had. I don't think it resolved all the combats. I may be mistaken. Okay. It's been a long time. Okay, the special phases. So remember, when there's 12 or more cards in one of these, it immediately stops things, and we go take a special phase, and then we return back to whatever card we're going to draw next. Okay. When taxation comes up, all barons get income from every city and concession that they control. Now, did we have a concession here? No, this is an ambassadorship, right? Yeah, I think that's a job. I don't see a concession available. But some of the assembly actions are concessions that provide you with money. And in addition, you get the money coming from your cities. Then everybody gets their cards back from here after the taxation round happens. The wages round, you have to pay wages for your troops, which is listed on the lower right of each unit. And you must pay your regular troops. If you don't have enough money to pay your regular troops, no big deal. But you must pay your regulars first. And then after you pay your regulars, you can pay your mercenaries. If you don't pay mercenaries, they disband. And that's not really a big deal. I think they just go back to the deck. They don't start marauding around the board like in some games. And finally, there's the assembly phase, and when that happens, each player is summoned to the assembly. Now, you don't actually have to go. I'm trying to remember how that happens. All barons who are not banned or prevented from attending the assembly because of a charge must attend the assembly. Okay, so you do have to go to it. When you go, you get a vote token plus 1 vote token for every city in the main kingdom, the main map section of the map that you control. Now, you may already have some vote counters from earlier assemblies. These can be held. They're not for the just for the one assembly. Barons' votes are open information until the voting starts. Then you appoint an acting chairman if the chairman is for some reason unable to be at the assembly. Votes on private motions. Any of the private motions must be voted on before any other motions in the assembly. I.e., these could be big game changer events. They can, especially if you play with the free variant. So you want to make sure that everybody has their full votes to face those. Is kind of the idea. Now, when you vote, you secretly take a handful of votes, and then everybody simultaneously reveals them and who they are casting their votes for. And ties are broken by the chairman. You can break them however he likes. And then the agenda's effect is resolved immediately. If it passes. If it fails, there may be an effect to that too. Then after all the agendas, and there will be 3 up here, I guess, every time, have been voted on, passed, or failed, and they have different ways of passing. So, for example, bail out the treasury. This is a yes-no vote. You must vote yes or no on it, or abstain. And the result is it either passes or it fails. This one, Ambassador to the Holy Lands, you vote on a baron to hold this title. And it doesn't look like it's a mixed thing. You get 10 crowns, but you miss the next assembly, and your nobles until the next assembly attack at minus 100, but they defend as normal. And then you lose it. So you're getting money in exchange for some penalties. You may not want this one, right? But you're stuck with it if you're voted for it, sort of. Now, what else is there? You can is that an office or a charge? That's a charge. You're only allowed to have 3 of those at any given time. If you get a 4th one, you discard one of the previous ones of your choice. And there are also offices, which I believe you're only allowed 1 per noble. Remember, these are the nobles. The charges go to the barons. Each noble can only have 1 office, and they may give you troops, they may give you other advantages. We'll see as they come up. We don't have one of them there. But one thing you start to notice when you look at this game is it's basically somebody took Kingmaker's idea, added a bunch of features to it. And this is with the original, but also with this one. And then kind of tweaked it around and everything to make it more accessible or exciting to what was seen as the bigger market at the time. Now, at the original time, that bigger market was the role-playing gamer, and this was definitely targeted at the role-playing gamer. In that time period that's passed, Games Workshop became humongous, created its own little world of a different type of gamer, and we're seeing something more related to that type of gamer than the role player, who this is now targeted at by the Fantasy Flight version, which, is where the term Ameritrash has kind of been taken, is this, the plastic minis and nice little, not usually, so usually they're not very much like war games, but they're more like war games than anything else, in a lot of cases. And, this definitely fits in that. And I would honestly say Kingmaker wasn't quite a war game. It was a game that I put in the Wimp Games category, and that's why there's so much overlap between the Ameritrash category, which a lot of people accept the name for, and my WIMP games that I really love. Now, I generally tend towards the WIMP games that get categorized more as war games than as Ameritrash, but there's enough overlap there that there's a lot of enjoyment for me in some of the AT games. And I would guess that for people who can get beyond the component issues of things that look more like traditional war games, all paper counters, paper maps, maybe whatever, and are willing to play games that are similar to what they're used to playing, maybe with a little bit more bent towards historical realism. I mean, like, this actually would be a real territory. They would maybe take a great deal of enjoyment in the games that I most like. Okay. So that aside, let's go further. Private motions, they're limited in the basic game, and I'm doing it with the limit to the following. You can rescind a ban on a baron who's currently banned from the assembly. You can discard a law, charge, or office currently in effect. You can postpone the entire assembly, and we just leave the current motions up there except for the private motions that have already been handled. And you can vote on agendas that have already passed into the discard pile. In the base original game, it really was make up your own private motion. Okay, how do you get banned from the assembly? Well, if you spit on the floor, no. Basically, if you refuse to abide by an assembly agenda item. So if it's a charge motion or office and you're being assigned it, you can just storm out and say, I ain't taking it. Okay? You're no longer invited to the assemblies. You don't get to play that part anymore. Nobody can assign you anything, but at least without your permission, I'm not sure. Yeah, you're allowed to assign titles and jobs to people who are banned from the assembly. They're allowed to refuse them at no cost. Another thing you can do is refuse to follow the laws. If laws are passed in the assembly, for example, a tax on income received during taxation phase, you can refuse to pay that, and then you will be banned from the assembly as long as no one reinstates you. Now, if you're reinstated, you're required to still follow those laws. You're coming back to the fold. So being reinstated into the assembly has its cost. You may need to get your laws rescinded that are preventing you from wanting to be there. A baron cannot refuse to follow an assembly's decision to withdraw an office or charge from the baron. If you're banned from the assembly, you're banned for the game unless a private motion reinstates you. If the chairman of the assembly is banned, the player with the highest number of votes becomes the new chairman of the assembly. Okay. How does the mercenary draft work? Remember, we got tokens out here, and we don't know when that gets triggered. Well, if there are a number of tokens equal to one more than the number of players in the mercenary draft, the draft gets triggered. There are only 6 mercenaries out there. I don't think everybody gets one. Okay. In order, starting with the baron who is leftmost, who paid the most or used a draft card early. The baron may hire an available mercenary. He must pay a hiring fee equal to the troop's wages, which is listed on the card. So you still have to pay a fee for the biggest units. But it may be unlikely that you want to pay this $8 fee up front when you're playing the versatile action. That's a lot to pay for first shot. And that, of course, is done when you play the actual card as opposed to during the mercenary hiring. If you don't want to hire a mercenary, you can withdraw your counter. If you have 2 or more Baron markers on the mercenary track, you get multiple chances to hire troops. Okay, special option on mercenaries of the same nationality. Each mercenary has a nationality listed on it. For example, these are Tuscans, these are English. If you hire one of a particular nationality and you have counters over on the draft that are further back, and there are more of the same nationality in the card, you can kind of one for one hire them all as a bunch. So for example, here the only pair up is there's 2 English. If I had 2 or more counters, I could spend 2 of my counters to hire both the English at once. I still have to pay the full hiring fee. And I remove 2 of those counters. One has to be the first one, the other one can be anything else that I have on the track. Now, I don't know how often that comes up, but the biggie is you can get a jump on hiring the mercenaries that you want if they're all of the same nationality. You just have to get 1 counter in the early spot, for whatever that's worth. And once you hire them, you have to give them either to a noble, who's either in your city or in a city or stronghold, or your stronghold, or a noble that's off the board, in which case you place the noble on the board, or your Baron's stronghold. Anything unhired at the end gets reshuffled back into the mercenary deck. All Baron markers are removed from the track, and then a number of mercenaries equal to 1 more than the number of Barons. I bet you we need another mercenary out here. Okay. So, yeah, there's always enough that each slot gets to hire someone if they want. Alright. I already talked about movement very, very briefly. There are some terrain effects, however, on this, which is mountains are impassable. Rivers are impassable unless crossed by a bridge. You can't move through another Baron's noble or city unless the opposing Baron allows it. Remember, you have 1 movement hex per turn, but on the roads you could travel up to 3, but you'd have to get permission through any other Baron's city. You can move through neutral ones though, which is kind of neat. Once you move your Baron or attack with him, he's exhausted. And that means he can't do that again in the entire turn. He still defends in battles. Alright, this is a good point for another break. I'm going to load this one up. It's going to be a long set. Okay, part of me wants to just say, hey, we know enough now, right? Let's just jump in and start playing. And we do. But I think going into how battles are resolved is important. Now let's start with some of the aspects here. So, sea movement is worked if you start next to in an area with a port. You can then travel to another area's port space, to their port space, and that exhausts you. Now, I'm using different leaders for different things. You can't combine this with movement on a road or anything. It's your entire movement for the turn. And then during the upkeep phase, if you're on the port area, you're refreshed along with all other exhausted nobles in the new area. And this is the only way to get to these kind of valuable off-board cities. Now, how are they valuable? Well, for the most part, they're valuable because they produce a lot of cash. They don't give you any political power within the kingdom itself. So, they're not, and they don't count towards victory conditions. So they're not, at least I don't believe they do. They're not really part of the core of the game, and I don't know how much effort they're worth obtaining. I've definitely seen in the old version of the game, they're largely ignored. I'm not sure whether other groups play using them more. Okay, during your movement, as you're moving through a territory, if it has your stronghold or an unexhausted noble, you can collect some of those troops and put them under the noble who's moving. It's got to be an unexhausted noble, though. If you're transferring from an army which has any casualty tokens on it, though, you have to take that entire army. You have to take all the troop cards from it and return the noble off board. Okay, how does a battle happen? Well, that happens either through mobilized forces or the versatile action card. You have to have at least one noble in an area with an opposing noble. And the Baron taking the action is the attacker. Now here, the rules start to come a little bit shaky. Because I've seen somewhere in the rules where it seems to indicate that there's a way to make exhausted nobles included as attackers. I think that's a mistake. Everything else in the rules seems to imply a noble who's attacking, and the attacker has the choice of how many of their nobles in an area they want to attack, use in a battle. The defender must use all of his defenders. And this is how I'm going to play. A noble who's attacking has to be unexhausted when you activate him for that attack. He can move if it's the mobilized forces or whatever it is. Okay. If a defending noble is with a city, the defender is considered to be inside the city. And the only way to attack him is using, if he's with a controlled city, the only way to attack him is using the siege mechanism. Okay. If there's not, and if the defender wants to come out and fight, he can. But then that becomes an open field battle. So for an open field battle, each side will have a commanding noble who adds 200 strength to his force, sort of. They're not 200 troop points, which is kind of important. Each player draws a fate card for every 100 troop strength they have. And I'd like to kind of look at one of these, but I don't have one available. So since the rule book is in so many colors and full printing, I'm sure there's a view of one. Of course not in the example of open field combat, right? So there's a slice on that card that indicates the battle value. And there's three possible values on there. Deal casualties to the other player, prevent casualties to your own, and cause victory chits to happen. And examples of all of them are there. That way I don't have to pull into the card. We don't see where it is on the card, but that's okay. Okay, now, since you had a leader, his 200 strength points aren't really troops. So you have to discard 2 of your cards, your choice, before you reveal what you're going to do, or what your damage is. And that gives you some command ability there. You get 2 extra cards, but you don't exactly get the full benefit from them. You can also discard more cards if you wish. And then you reveal your cards. Some of the cards may say draw 1 fate. And if they say that, you draw an additional fate card and add it to your reveal cards. And that could just keep going. You tally up the casualties that you cause to the other person. You deal 100 casualties versus their prevent 100s. And those cause little casualty markers, which I have somewhere. Oh yeah, the gravestones. And then you have to assign them. And the Baron assigns them to his own armies. Each army can only take the casualties that it has troops for. If the total number of casualties is ever equal or greater than the number of troops in the army, the noble leading those armies dies. In general, that means he comes back with his heir. But there are some possibilities that you can lose a noble permanently this way. And now there's some kind of weird rules that look like they came from the original GW game in terms of not really fitting in. If all of Baron's nobles in a battle die, he cannot assign any further casualty tokens. I mean, you know, essentially, you have to spread it does make sense. You have to spread the casualties out among your leaders. If you assign one, the last casualty, if you assign casualties that are equal to the last of your troops, then that baron or that actual particular noble dies. But there might be other nobles with troops still in the battle. Okay. The defender is allowed to see how the attacker assigns his casualties first. Now, if both people are still around, then you count victories. And the number of +1 victories that you've collected in the battle, including from your special ability, are compared. If you have more than your enemy, you've won, as follows. If you have 2 more than the enemy, you have a full victory. And any opposing troops with nobles fighting in the battle are killed. So it doesn't matter how many casualties you caused, if you can get 2 more victories over the opponent, you have destroyed his army completely. A partial victory is just 1 more battle victory than the opponent, and the opposing nobles have to retreat. That doesn't really give you anything. It gives you the hex. But you've probably taken more casualties to get those victory counters, right? Maybe? I don't know. And a stalemate, if you both have the same number of victories, nothing happens. I guess you both stay in the space. So if you die, any casualty tokens on armies with the... so the casualty tokens stay assigned to the army until they've been recovered. You don't lose your troops by taking casualty markers. The only way to lose your troops here is to have a whole noble force wiped out. Okay, attacking a city is very, very similar to attacking a field battle if you do an assault. But there's another option, which is the siege. Let me explain the assault first because that's the more similar to the two, to the previous battle. So cities have a strength point value. If you're in the same space as a city, you can attack it. The strength point value is added to any troops that are present in that city with a noble. And the only additional thing you have here is you have these breach markers, which are hits against the city's strength. Do victory markers matter? That's one question, actually, I have. The attacker can cast... Yeah, you can capture the city by getting a full or partial victory through the victory markers. So you can capture a city that you haven't done a lot of damage to, which could be kind of nice with an assault. And that's kind of a trickery action, you know, like Guile in the old SPI Crusades. Okay, the other option is to siege a city, and in order to siege a city, you have to have, just more troops, I believe, than the city, and and whatever troops are inside the city. And the commanding leader bonus counts towards those troops. So that's why you see some of my people have set up with like 2 leaders outside cities. They're going for that longer siege option. They're not going to try to just overwhelm a city all at once with their superior firepower. And the siege option works as follows. The first time you do an activation to besiege, you just mark it with this little gate. And unfortunately there's no real nice way to put these. They just kind of lean there. It's kind of a shame that they didn't build some sort of slot into these plastic pieces to hold these. But anyway, I think it'll be clear enough. And that just indicates that the city's under siege. If you do another siege action and still have, and you can't do it unless you have, and still have more forces there, then the city falls and becomes yours, and there's no damage to it. And that's awesome. Strongholds can be attacked in the same ways as cities. And again, these can have defensive troops assigned to them, though, which cities cannot. And that kind of changes the flavor a little bit, makes them perhaps a little more defensible. But still, when it comes down to it, they're 400 fixed troops to begin with. And the players on the board, the nobles on the board, have the strength to take these out. That's why I don't want to play with the sudden death rule. I believe that some players would just wipe out an opponent right away. You don't gain much from it, but you are reducing the other people who might win the game. Okay. When you retreat from a battle that you've lost, you have to draw for deserters. You draw a fate card. And if you have mercenaries of that nationality, you have to lose one mercenary unit of that nationality. Only your mercenaries desert you that way. And then you retreat your units, even if you're exhausted. They have to go to an adjacent area that does not have any city or nobles belonging to another baron. If you can't do that, the noble is then exhausted and placed at his baron's stronghold. I thought you were exhausted from combat anyway. No. It's when you use movement or battle from an action card. Okay. What about if you die? If you die, you draw a fate card, and if you had any mercenaries of that nationality assigned to you, you have to choose one of that nationality to desert. It goes back in the mercenary deck. You lose casualties. For every casualty token on your noble's army, you have to discard strength worth of mercenaries. If you can't discard the mercenaries equal to the casualties, you must discard as many possible without going over. And then the casualty markers are removed. You never have to worry about your regular troops. The noble's removed from the board, any offices he holds are discarded, and his heir shows up with the remaining troops and can be placed on the board during the upkeep phase. If he has no heir, the mercenaries are then shuffled back into the mercenary deck, and the regular troops assigned to him are removed from the game entirely. This is the only way you can lose regular troops from your hand, and that would really suck. Okay. Winning the game in the upkeep phase, if you have more than half the unraised cities in the kingdom, you win. Alternatively, and this is where we go to the king rolls. If these are out, we slip to that particular option, which is going to be... Let's go over it again very briefly because we hit it where it wasn't. The king is determined to be the person with the most influence points at that point. The goal of the game begins hitting 16 influence points in one of these winning the game steps, which is going to be harder to track. That's one of the things. This is real easy to see. Oh, look, game's over, man. With the king counter, it's going to be a little tougher to track how much, whether somebody's actually got their victory. I think I can handle that. But I could see where you end up playing an extra turn because somebody's really dense. And I've played with people who are like that. They usually aren't going to be the people who are ahead, though. Okay. And what else do we have? We have the king gets his bonuses at that point, the army cards, and his extra influence each turn. All right. So let's look at what else we got here. Bargaining. What are you allowed to trade? You can pay money. You can give money and you can give favors to one another. You can pay... you can spend faith or cast votes in a way that's legal to you for someone else to give you money. But you can't exchange the actual tokens. These exchanges aren't done simultaneously, so there's no way of absolutely ensuring that someone will follow through with something. You can say, I will pay you if you vote my way, or here's some money, vote my way. You can't say, I'll give you this money as you're voting and be held to it. One or the other action has to actually happen first. Okay. If there's less players, some of the kingdom cities are removed from the game. They're raised initially. Hey, we didn't handle raising cities. You get, after you siege a city, and I think it can only happen immediately after. Let's see if I can find this somewhere. I know it's in the rules. But the rules are not well designed. Raising a city. Okay. Fortifying. So cities are marked as fortified. We explained this before by flipping them over. If you capture a fortified city, it stays fortified. If it goes neutral, there's no neutral counters for fortified cities, so it stops being fortified at that point. Raising a city, when you first take a city, however you take it, you can burn it down. And you remove the plastic counter and any control marker, and you get 3 times its income in money. And then it's just gone from the game, basically. Okay. Other options. Game length, you can play around with how many tokens you put in here. And the more, the longer it is. The open private motions, make them pretty much anything you like. And they've got some examples here. You can make a motion to prohibit sieges. And obviously, look, if the motion is too extreme and it passes anyway somehow, players who are too affected by it can just agree that they're no longer part of the assembly. They don't want to play by those rules. Another option is exchanging heirs. You can cut deals to make the alliances more binding by agreeing that you're giving heirs to your nobles between one another. And at that point, once you have an heir, and these would usually be mutually exchanged in historical situations, each player can use them as they like and kill them whenever they like. So basically, if you think you've been violated in a deal, you can kill the heir. Of course, if you've done a mutual exchange, you kill the heir to someone, they are going to kill your heir. And if a noble has no heir and he dies in battle or something, well, he can't come back on the board. Of course, we'd have to have some sort of marker to indicate that. I'm not sure how to do that directly. Player elimination. That's the option. If the stronghold is taken, you're out of the game. I think that's got some risks too. Might make an interesting game. Might makes right. Hey, get rid of this crap. Now, I would be tempted to do that, except for the king variant, which is why I'm playing with that. And if I play again, I may end up trying the Crown and Glory, the full spew of it. I wanted to do that at first, but I actually think that the base game looks interesting enough, and this actually changes it so much that I'd rather play both versions over time. Okay, well, I guess we're about ready to start. It's been a long road through the rules. Sorry about, my style of learning the rules with you. The reason for that is it really does help me to learn the rules, to speak them aloud again. So I will make less mistakes through this. If you hung out this long, maybe you've gotten an idea, a better idea of the game than you would have had you just listened to my briefer overview. But yeah, it should be interesting. I know that the original game really struck me as kind of broken, but a slightly better game than Kingmaker. I hate to say it, but it really did still improve on it, and I'm hoping this actually takes it a step further. See, the problem with Kingmaker is, and the new cards for it helped a lot, but it ends up in this kind of total stalemate position. And I think this game, with the influence markers, can't. Alright. Well, let's see how it plays.